Dr. Harrington sat behind his desk. A fit man of about 50, his gaze followed Joel intently. He gestured for Joel to take a seat in a sculpted leather chair. "Welcome home, Joel," he said cryptically. Joel walked past the conference table in the massive office and took a seat in front of the desk. "I'm from Alaska," Joel replied. "No tech, Joel," the CEO said. "No tech is your home." "Why did you attack me then? Do you know who I am? How did you send that message? Where's my family?" Dr. Harrington raised his hand, not unkindly, and spoke reassuringly. "There are many questions about you, my friend. Some I will answer for you now. Some you will need to answer for me. And some we must answer together." "Let's start with why I was attacked. I think that's one you'll need to answer for me." Dr. Harrington shrugged. "Things got out of hand. Demetrius, especially, got overzealous. But it was critical that we met. It's the only way you can take the next step. The only way you can reach your full potential. And if it's any comfort, anyone or anything else in the world would have been taken down in 3 seconds by my agents." "Why do you care if I reach my full potential?" Joel asked. "Because you reaching your full potential is the only way no tech can realize its full potential, an event that can make it the greatest force for good the world has ever known." "So what is my full potential? Who am I? What am I?" Dr. Harrington paused. "You are a mistake. You are also my greatest invention, and you might someday be the ultimate fulfillment of what a person can be," he said. "Perhaps you've already unlocked the full extent of your abilities, but I suspect you've only tapped into a fraction of them." "You designed me?" Joel said, looking down. "Why don't you know what my abilities are then? Wasn't it you who gave them to me?" "My dear friend," Dr. Harrington responded, "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have." Ron shut the door to his office and pulled out his personal cell phone. "George," he said, "he's here. Their meeting's begun. Yes, of course I bugged the room. He doesn't look like anything special. Now, George, I haven't decided to give you any information at all. I'm just keeping my options open. Passing secrets along to our biggest rival is not something I take lightly. Think of a number with a lot of zeros at the end. In the meantime, I'll say hello to your old MIT chum, Robert, for you." A tray with a plate of pizza along with fried chicken and fries arrived for Joel. He moved to the conference table to eat, where Dr. Harrington joined him. "What do you mean you didn't give me anything I didn't already have?" Joel asked between bites. "You just said you made me. Everything I am is because of you. To explain who you are and how you developed, it's first necessary to understand how I engineered the folks you met yesterday. As you may have guessed, they were my goal," Dr. Harrington replied. "Okay then, since you want to start with them, where did they come from? Were they just cooked up in a lab?" "No. For what it's worth, all of them had a biological parent." "Parent? Singular?" "Yes, effectively. I came across a study in which an ovum was made to divide and form a blastocyst, the beginning stages of an embryo, without fertilization, a phenomenon known as parthogenesis, like with Komodo dragons and hammerhead sharks, among many other animals. So they came from unfertilized ovums, which you then cloned, perhaps?" "No. Getting a large number of women to donate their eggs was impractical, and I didn't want creepily identical clones. There was an easier way if I could manage a small adjustment." "Men? It would be easier if you got the DNA from men," Joel said. "So where did the ovums come from? They couldn't come from thin air." "Hardly. But it was one ovum and one X chromosome, and just those were cloned many times." "Whose ovum?" "A woman our enemies thought they had rendered impotent forever. Instead, they will find it was she who created the vessel that carried and nurtured the seed of their imminent end." Joel had read enough about Dr. Harrington to surmise whom he meant. "You mean your wife? The one the Primes killed years ago? You saved one of her ovums?" Dr. Harrington nodded. A gut decision. I wasn't even sure why at the time. But that decision was pivotal. So, is she my mother? I wouldn't put it that way. The cloned ovums were enucleated, except for half, where all but the X chromosome stayed to create a female. Otherwise, the entire genetic profile came from that easier and cheaper source known as men. What men? Men I paid $20 a piece for their samples starting 20 years ago. All from different men, to prevent any carbon copies. $20? Joel said, hanging his head. My dad sold me for $20. Do not insult yourself, Joel. He was not your father. He was a sperm donor, nothing more. Do not intimate that he can take credit for you. Who was my father? Joel asked. Who were all these men? They were the kind of men that would accept $20 to cut all ties with their offspring, and do so without asking questions. The homeless, the addicted, degenerates of all kinds, with a few broke college kids in the mix. How many of these men did you find? Joel asked. 5,000. My God, Joel said. A force of 5,000 like the ones I face today? A force for good, Joel. But we're far from being a bunch of clones of homeless men, Joel said. Yes, of course, that's the real question here. Not how did I grow people in a lab, but how did I grow people like you, like them in a lab? I can tell you it wasn't easy. There were, of course, many characteristics I wanted you and your cohorts to have. Attempting to manipulate genes to achieve even one characteristic is an extremely complicated process. A given trait may be influenced by 20 different genes, or a single gene may influence 20 different traits. Tweak a gene one way, and the unintended consequences can be legion. No, manipulating genes one by one to achieve desired characteristics would have been a Sisyphean task. You didn't give up, though? Dr. Harrington chuckled. No, indeed not. Perhaps I would have, until I got a little inspiration from a naturally occurring hormone, which retards muscle growth. A hormone that retards muscle growth? Joel asked incredulously. Yes, a hormone by the name of myostatin was discovered several years ago. A researcher found that by deleting the gene that produced myostatin, he produced muscular mice, which led to his discovery of a young boy in Germany, born without the gene to produce myostatin, who had the physique of an adult bodybuilder and was several times stronger than a normal boy his age. So, why even have such a hormone if people and animals are stronger without it? We'll get to that, Dr. Harrington responded. First and foremost, I was learning the hard way that designing these children the way I wanted from the bottom up was going to be a long and frustrating process. I knew it would be much easier if I could design them in a top-down fashion, if I could signal the characteristics I wanted and let the embryos take care of the details, much the way evolving species adapt to their environment. Now, wait a minute, Joel said. You're talking about Lamarckian evolution, an organism adapting to its environment within one generation, like a giraffe's neck becoming longer to reach high leaves. It's been proven wrong. It doesn't happen. The giraffes would have to adapt by having the ones with longer necks survive, while the others died off. It's Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest. Yes, well, as is so often the case with biology, that answer is not so cut and dry. After all, what is genetic change? When a man lifts weights and makes his muscles stronger, he actually does damage to his muscles. Then the body perceives the need to reconstruct the muscles bigger and stronger, and initiates a change in genetic expression from the nucleus to repair the muscles. Is that a genetic change? Yes and no, I guess, Joel replied. There are a lot of yes and no's when it comes to genetics and evolution. Take a look at giraffes again. For example, what if they could change the length of their necks in one lifetime? It wouldn't prove they were rearranging their genes. Changing the length of their necks could just be an ability they always had. It would arguably be less of a change than a chameleon changing its skin. In fact, trees do grow continuously throughout their lifetimes toward their food source, namely light. due to a chemical they produce called indole 3 acidic acid, better known as auxin. But you're talking about plants, an entirely different kingdom, fundamentally different from animals. So, an animal can't have abilities more typical of plants? Why not? Because we're fundamentally different. For example, I would assume an animal can't perform photosynthesis. Dr. Harrington pounded his fist on the table. Don't assume, Joel. I know, Joel replied, raising his hands apologetically. It's lazy. Don't be lazy. The world can't afford it. If... Dr. Harrington put his head down and smiled, calming himself down. Forgive the outburst of a crotchety old man. In fact, there is an animal that uses photosynthesis. The green sea slug does indeed produce chlorophyll and utilizes photosynthesis, turning light into food, albeit as a supplement to the food it eats. Well, maybe so, Joel replied, a little exasperated. But there are certain things that are just genetically fixed for most organisms, including people. Dr. Harrington sat back in his chair and smiled. Oh, like what? Joel thought for a minute. Well, like one's sex, one's brain cells at adulthood, and, of course, no one had the ability to physically recombine one's genes in a purposeful manner. Until I came along, of course. Dr. Harrington shook his head. Wrong, wrong, and wrong, he replied. There are many organisms that can change their sex if it makes it easier to mate, including oysters and several kinds of fish. Really? Joel asked. Indeed, and experiments have shown that canaries, amongst many other animals, can regenerate their brain cells. An ability we lost somewhere along the line, Joel replied. Dr. Harrington nodded. But my truly unique ability, physically recombining my genes, is not unique either. Something I confirmed after much study, for this was the most important question to me as it is to you. If changing just about any facet of an organism within a lifetime can be a genetic ability, why couldn't an organism be born with a genetic ability to rearrange its genes? And then I found examples of just such an ability. With an amoeba or something? Dr. Harrington shook his head. I'm talking about all of us, Joel. Or rather, the antibody-producing cells we all have. Well, of course they shut down harmful pathogens, but... Dr. Harrington nodded. Literally billions of pathogens. These antibodies work not by consuming pathogens, but rather by binding to the antigens on these pathogens, rendering them inert. As you know, binding to the receptors of a given pathogen requires a precise fit on the part of the antibody. Researchers always found this puzzling, because every pathogen and its receptors are different, so shutting down billions of pathogens requires billions of different antibodies. It was always a mystery how the body was able to enable such variability. It turns out that our B cells, our lymphocytes that produce these varied antibodies, actually recombine their genes while we are in the womb, allowing for over 1 trillion unique B cells in the body, each one latching onto pathogens differently. When an invading pathogen latches onto the right B cell, the immune system targets that pathogen for destruction, and countless antibody facsimiles are then generated, deactivating the other invading cells. That's very interesting. All of these unexpected abilities are interesting. Still, we are limited genetically in many ways. It's one thing that there are certain abilities we've never had, but clearly there are extremely useful abilities our ancestors had that we've now lost. Why would that be? Dr. Harrington smiled and rubbed his chin, then responded by saying, Have you gotten enough to eat? While looking at the 4 empty plates on the tray in front of the young man. For now, Joel replied. What is the thing of primary importance in every living thing's life? Joel sat and thought for a moment. I'm not sure. Reaching our full potential? Doing good in the world? No. Dr. Harrington interjected. The most important thing in life, my son, is getting enough to eat. What does that have to do with a species losing the ability to actively change its genes, or any other beneficial trait? Joel asked. Take these imaginary giraffes. that can change the lengths of their necks by changing their genes. Now, imagine they arrive at an environment where they can reach all the leaves in the area, but there aren't enough to go around. Okay? Now, imagine one has a mutation where it loses this ability to change its neck length. I guess it wouldn't make much difference, Joel replied. No, that giraffe would have an advantage. Why? Because every ability an organism has comes with a price. It takes up resources, not just using that ability, but simply having it. The extra genetic information that must be stored, the greater complexity, all of it. If that ability doesn't help the animal survive, it becomes a hindrance, potentially a deadly one. So, once organisms enter an environment to which they are well suited, it would be only natural that they might evolve to lose unneeded abilities, Joel said. Yes, in fact, organisms often evolve toward greater simplicity, and most organisms today are still one-celled and microscopic. Scientists have found evidence that sponges have actually lost their nervous systems over time. Other animals that could once feed themselves independently have evolved to become simple parasites. Do you see why someone like yourself would almost certainly never evolve naturally? Yes. This was the dilemma I faced. We are gods, trapped in the bodies of dying animals. We are creatures with endless potential, constantly dragged down by our own primitive needs. So, inspired by the example of myostatin, of shutting down our limits, I searched for months until I finally found the gene that had inactivated this gene-changing ability we inherited from our single-celled ancestors. I deleted the gene and reactivated this ability for the whole body, not just our B cells. So now I was able to enhance the embryo's genes by using a top-down approach. I was able to give them the necessary stimuli to make them far stronger, faster, and more agile than any normal human could possibly be. So, do their genes change now? Joel asked. No, they do not. Attached to the gene that allowed for gene rearrangement, I placed special telomeres, structures that affect the rate at which chromosomes age. I manipulated the telomeres to cause the gene and the subsequent RNA and proteins to die right before the infants left the incubators. But you never did that with me, did you? Joel said. No. Why not? Because I made a mistake with you in the second stage. What second stage? Joel asked. The development stage, the nurture stage, although I have to say I wasn't very nurturing with you. About that, I've read about others like me who grew up outside of civilization. They didn't turn out like me at all. They became more like animals, seeming to lose many abilities they were genetically capable of, not gaining them. Oh, yes. Feral children. A very interesting phenomenon, Dr. Harrington replied. They also offer an excellent illustration of how you are different from regular people. When it comes to language, for example, our learning causes actual physical changes in the brain. More neural connections are created, even after a brief period of time. What does this have to do with feral children? Joel asked. There was a girl in Ukraine, for example, raised by dogs from age 3 to 7, learning how to act like a dog during that time, not how to speak. The neural connections in the brain that are created by learning language didn't form. Actually, not only did the connections not form, but the chance of their forming at a later age was greatly diminished through brain pruning, the literal consumption of unused neural connections, and myelinization. Joel had dealt with myelin and myelinization while working on a cure for paralysis, myelin being the fatty sheaths that form over nerves. Myelinization helps to insulate and protect neurons, but it also makes it much more difficult, if not impossible, for those neurons to make new connections. Like the ones the girl needed in order to learn language, Joel said. Exactly. Instead, when this girl was rescued from her alcoholic parents, she crawled on all fours, barked, and licked herself. In another example, a 6-year-old boy brought up by vervet monkeys moved on all fours and chattered like a monkey. After a year in human society, he had learned to wear clothes and walk upright sometimes, but he still had not picked up a word of speech. Both are doing better now after extensive treatment, but the effects of their ordeals are still evident. The myelinization and pruning process made it more difficult for them to fully develop, Joel said. Dr. Harrington nodded. It's not just feral children, though. In a Nobel Prize-winning experiment, some kittens were raised in a room for several weeks with only vertical stripes, while others were raised in a room with only horizontal stripes. A few weeks later, the cats in the room with the vertical stripes could not see horizontal stripes, such that they could not find the seat of a chair to hop onto, but could avoid the legs of those same chairs. The cats raised in the room with horizontal stripes could not see vertical stripes. They would jump onto the seat of the chairs but bump into the legs of those same chairs. They found the same effect would extend to other mammals. How could a cat go blind if its eyes are fine? Joel asked. Because we see with our brains, the visual cortex more specifically, not our eyes. But why should a person have his potential restricted as he ages at all? Joel asked. Well, let's consider that boy raised by monkeys again. He became poorly adapted for life in civilization, but well adapted to life in the jungle, and the architecture of his brain reflected this. That still doesn't explain why their brains should have hindered learning human behavior later, Joel said. Doesn't it, though? Consider the resources in maintaining those abilities. The human brain, Dr. Harrington continued, only takes up 2% of the body's weight, but on average it uses up 15 to 20% of the body's calories and oxygen. Considerably more in your case, I'd say. It's a very expensive organ. But even within the brain, not all functions are created equal. The more complex the function, the more expensive. For example, the little muscles in the hands and fingers that handle delicate, complex movements take up the greatest part of the motor cortex, responsible for controlling voluntary movements. But sophistication, being able to process a lot of information, that's a huge part of what makes us human, allows us to progress, Joel said. Yes, we are the first species to foolishly struggle against our own limitations. We may think acquiring new knowledge and trying to expand our horizons is a wonderful thing. But evolution doesn't see it that way. Not if we're not learning something essential for survival, Dr. Harrington replied. But our big brains have been essential for survival, Joel said. When they aren't bringing us to the brink of our own extinction, Dr. Harrington replied. A quandary not shared by many animals who have survived 1,000 times longer than our species. Take the jellyfish, for example. It has no brain. It's 95% water with just a few nerves, hoping something runs into its tentacles for the most part. But that simple nervous system burns a tiny fraction of the calories of the human brain, allowing it to survive for over 500 million years. But our ape ancestors got more complex right until Homo sapiens came along, Joel said. But first, our big brains helped to kill off most of our predecessors. How so? Joel asked. We humans were born out of an era of unusually high volcanic activity that produced unusually rapid changes in climate. When the first ice age hit, the apes were largely forced out of the thinning jungles and out onto the plains. Their big bodies and long, strong arms made for swinging burned up a lot of calories, as did their big brains. Most of the ape species died out, but a few didn't, as that ice age ended and we entered another warm period. Dr. Harrington added how another ice age soon followed as the cycle continued, putting a premium on the flexibility provided by ever-increasing intelligence. And the myelinization and pruning processes helped our predecessors to focus on their cold weather skills when it was cold and their warm weather skills when it was warm, Joel said. Yes, It was a way of adapting without genetic mutations, Dr. Harrington replied. Which is all the more reason you'd have to account for it when designing the children, Joel said. Yes, but I wasn't just worried about them losing their abilities or falling short physically. I had to worry about their character, things I couldn't teach them while they were in an incubator. But I was unwilling to turn their home into a prison camp. So I looked to do the same thing I had before, find a totally new technique, one that rejected conventional notions of our limitations. It meant tackling what I think is the most strange and confounding fact of life. We actually have little direct control of our bodies and brains. I had to learn why we can't simply tell our muscles to grow, or shut down our fear, or learn how to throw a great left jab after one lesson. What did you find? Joel asked. I found that one possible explanation is that there are no direct connections between our conscious and unconscious mind. More specifically, there is no direct connection between our cortex and cerebellum, the region that controls our subconscious mind. Rather, the cortex and cerebellum are separated by what's known as the tentorium. From the cerebellum, there are direct connections to the brainstem and body's entire nervous and hormonal systems. But first is this filtering between the cortex and the lower parts of the brain. So our decisions, our training that originate in the cortex are screened, in a sense, based on whether or not they help survival? Joel replied. So it seems. Now, it has been found, for example, in elite athletes that actions they take, such as returning a serve in tennis or striking a fastball, originate more in the cerebellum and happen almost automatically. Whereas for a novice, these actions take place more in the cortex. The process literally, and again physically, moves to lower parts of the brain. But the process takes hundreds, if not thousands of hours of practice. So, how did you get around such a problem? Joel asked. I built a connection. How? You're talking about two separate sections of the brain. Well, the neurons were still in a pluripotent state. It was only necessary to take the ends of some of the axons, the tendrils sent out by neurons to connect with other neurons, and pull them down toward the cerebellum, somewhat like peeling off some of the wires inside a cable. I was then able to stimulate a pathway of new neural connections to form that went into the rudimentary version of the cerebellum. So the embryos now had a fully formed connection between the conscious and subconscious part of their brain, Joel said. Yes, and subsequently the learning and training programs set up under my auspices were much more impactful, so much so that their influence would override any passive subconscious effect from the children's peers or other environmental agents. So, what went wrong with me? Joel asked. Dr. Harrington paused. When I was splicing off the bundles of neurons from the cortex, I only wanted to do so in a certain area, the one that handles conscious learning. Well, I guess I didn't show much promise as a brain surgeon during that first experiment, because I made a mistake, after which I built a machine to do the surgery on the embryos. You see, I cut into the prefrontal cortex. Joel understood, this area being where one's judgment is found, one's conscious decision-making. And that is why I faced a conundrum, Dr. Harrington continued. Because such a person could choose to change themselves in any way the brain could direct, Joel said. Yes, he could purposefully signal his brain and body through electrical impulses, release of hormones, etc., to make desired alterations. He would be impossible to control, Joel said. Exactly, Dr. Harrington replied. And that's why I had to go. I wouldn't put it that way. I felt you presented a grave danger to me, the staff, and the other children. But you chose not to kill me. No, I didn't think that was necessary. I flew you in your early embryonic state to a clearing about 100 miles north of the center in Alaska and left you there, Dr. Harrington said. So you left me there to die instead of killing me outright? Hardly, Joel. You were the most adaptable organism in the world. I knew you would survive, albeit not in your current form." Joel paused. "Wait a minute. You didn't think I'd actually become human? You mentioned that in a stable environment, organisms evolve to stay simple or become simpler. You thought before my cortex really developed, before I could make conscious decisions, my genes would adapt to the environment by shutting down my metabolically expensive humanity and turn me into something more basic and efficient," Joel said. "Yes, I didn't stay around and take photos. But according to my calculations, you were on your way to life as a conifer. Perhaps something else, but not a boy. Because a boy wouldn't survive out there." Joel thought for a moment of the fibrous roots that had started to form on his feet while living in the Bronx, and how they showed perhaps he wasn't so immune to the body's drive toward simplicity and efficiency after all. He decided not to mention it. "So what happened?" Joel asked instead. "This happened," Dr. Harrington responded, pulling out an article which he handed to Joel. The article was over 20 years old. It was titled, "Battle Rages Over Pipeline." The article from an Anchorage newspaper discussed a pipeline that originated in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It had been finished 2 years prior, but had been intermittently flowing and shut down due to political disputes. "What does this have to do with me?" Joel asked. "When I brought you to that clearing, I was upset, distracted. I noticed that the clearing was about 1 acre wide and its length extended as far as I could see. But I never thought about why," Dr. Harrington replied. "The pipeline. They had already cleared that area for the oil pipeline," Joel said. "It wasn't even a month later that the 2 pipes they had been building toward each other were fused together and started flowing. Less than a month after that, they were ordered to stop the flow. And all of this was going on right where you had left me. It would get warmer or colder in that clearing depending on whether the oil was flowing," Joel guessed. "Yes, without that pipeline, your habitat was stable. Frigid, but stable. With the pipeline running, then not running, there was more than just a change in temperature. The entire ecosystem would change. The number of plants and animals would vary, as would the types of each." "Which put a premium on versatility," Joel said, "just as it had for our prehistoric ancestors." "Yes, and you were still human, after all. A stable environment would have suppressed that, but the changing ecosystem was the only signal you needed to take the genetic path to humanity. So now you know what you are and how you came to be. But I think you know, taking on the features of different animals and other organisms isn't all I can do. I've been able to affect not just myself, but those around me, with my healing abilities, for example," Joel said. "Yes, and here again, you are not as unique as you might think." Secretary of Defense Jack Romwell stood in his crisp, tailored suit, having returned from a 10-mile run less than an hour prior. Plenty of white streaked through his hair, but he still had a full head of it, and he stood straight and tall, over 6 feet. His distinguished face had a concerned look, however. His undersecretary was interrupting his phone conversation with the Pentagon. The undersecretary knew not to interrupt him unless it was urgent. "What is it, Hal?" "We got a situation here. Something going on up in northeastern Connecticut. A group of 3 young people, a woman and 2 men, kicked the shit out of about 20 people up there, most of them big bikers. Eyewitnesses said they fought like they were superhuman, lifting 200-pound men over their heads with one arm like rag dolls. They were looking for a man named Joel, a guy that's always had a lot of rumors circling around him." "What kind of rumors?" Romwell asked. The undersecretary filled in Romwell on the rumors about the odd man and the even odder occurrences linked to him. In any case, these 3 caught up with Joel at a small college library and the fight tore the place apart. What's more, a couple of the eyewitnesses swear this same Joel was taking on the features of animals as he fought. The undersecretary described what the witnesses saw and the helicopter that had come. "What's the press doing with this?" Romwell asked. "They're there, but they have been unsure what to release when it comes to the seemingly supernatural stuff. They don't want to look foolish later. And there have been some iPhone videos posted online, but nothing too clear through the holes they had to shoot through." "Let's keep it that way. Get a team sent, and let's lay on the press. How did you get this intel? It came to me from the local FBI field office. It's just them and local police so far. That situation should stay the same too. Let the field office know this is a Defense Department issue from here on out. Run interference and keep the state police, etc., out of it. Got it. So what can this mystery boy do? How do these disparate stories about him tie together? Romwell asked. That's what I'd like to know. No, the secretary said. That's what we're going to know. Romwell hung up with the undersecretary and called back the general. Mark, he said, as his subordinate picked up the phone. We've got a new mission. After we hang up, I'm going to tell the president what she needs to know. Silent Eagle is the only intelligence agency that needs to know about this operation, and nobody in Congress needs to know about it. Understood, Mr. Secretary, the general said. What do we need to know? So I'm not unique, even in affecting organisms around me? Joel said. How so? What do I have to learn from what others are doing already? Joel, you have escaped the limitations that evolution has placed on our species. But that doesn't mean you can do anything fundamentally different than what others can do. Now, that may apply to the others you've trained, but certainly I've gone beyond just what normal people can do, taken to another level. First of all, you should know that your brothers and sisters in this journey are called initiates. This is the title they earn when they have completed their learning, although they will use the innocuous term community volunteers, or CVs for short, to the outside world. Okay, but what about the things I can do that the initiates can't do? That no one else can do? Joel asked. The reason I say you are not fundamentally different from anyone or anything else is that every action you take is executed through the use of signaling, as it is for all organisms. For example, we signal our muscles to lift or move. A wound signals the body to heal. Signaling requires that the object being signaled already knows how to perform the required task, inside one's own body or outside. In fact, the demarcation between inside the body and outside is not always so clear. What do you mean? Joel asked. Well, we know that the body can be signaled to release endorphins to relieve pain, adrenaline to energize our muscles and sharpen our senses, or lower our bad cholesterol levels. Wait, I was with you on the first two, but not the third. You're talking about a drug effect when it comes to lowering bad cholesterol? Joel said. There is a drug effect, but only in terms of sending a signal. Most drugs are enzymes. They signal the body to initiate chemical reactions. They can't make the body do something it couldn't otherwise do any more than a garage door opener could make a garage door change color. The drug simply asks the body to heal itself. Let's look at lowering cholesterol with statins, for example. Statins work by signaling receptors on the liver to reduce production of LDL, the harmful kind of cholesterol. But it is the liver itself that causes this positive effect. So in a sense, drugs illuminate the ways the body already knows how to heal itself. I know what you mean, but it still seems like the drug is doing most of the work. Then, how about a case where the drug wasn't actually doing any work? Have you heard of the case of Mr. Wright? Dr. Harrington reviewed the case. Mr. Wright was a patient who, back in 1957, came to one Dr. West, riddled with cancerous tumors the size of oranges. He heard that a new drug, Cribiozen, had been recently discovered to be effective against cancer. Dr. West gave Mr. Wright the drug, and within 3 days the tumors had melted, like snowballs on a hot stove. Unfortunately, 2 months later, Mr. Wright read a report that Cribiozen was a quack remedy and suffered an immediate relapse. Dr. West told the patient the report was wrong and gave him what he said was a refined double-strength version of the drug, but was actually water. Nonetheless, his tumors melted away in days again. This was until 2 months later when Mr. Wright read a definitive study stating that Cribiozen was useless. Mr. Wright died 2 days later. The case was considered an outlier. Certainly that one case was unusual, Dr. Harrington said. But clinical trials have shown that for many tough diseases, the success rate for a placebo can run well over 50%. But they weren't trying to signal themselves directly, Joel said. They were all hoping for help from some kind of outside agent. Why do you think it works so often anyway? Perhaps using an outside agent or a person thinking he is can sometimes unleash abilities one could not control directly. But you're still talking about one person being involved, even if there is a belief in an outside agent. My abilities to affect others, that makes me unique, Joel said. Not really, Dr. Harrington replied without hesitation. Take another look at the lessons we've learned from natural history. More specifically, consider the two most important developments in the history of evolution. The first, eukaryotic cells, cells with a nucleus, and the first multicellular organism. You'll find that it's not always so easy to tell where one organism ends and another begins. You have the same kind of signaling back and forth between organisms that you have within the same organism. How so? Looking back, we don't find that multicellular organisms began when a unicellular organism mutated into a multicellular organism as one might assume. Throughout most of natural history, even unicellular organisms have competed with and eaten each other. Sometimes, however, these unicellular organisms would communicate and cooperate with one another, even exchanging DNA. And then something happened. One of these unicellular organisms died for the good of the group. And that was the beginning of multicellular organisms? Joel replied. Yes, but it wasn't the start of two organisms becoming one. How so? Before multicellular organisms, some of the very organelles within eukaryotic cells may have originated with two organisms cooperating. Joel looked puzzled. How did that happen? One organism invited another one in? Dr. Harrington laughed. More like, one went to consume another, and luckily the eaten one survived long enough to be of greater benefit alive than dead. In fact, one organelle makes us more alive, you might say, or certainly more energetic. Mitochondria, Joel inferred. Dr. Harrington nodded. What's interesting about mitochondria is that unlike most organelles, which have their genetic material contained in the nucleus, mitochondria have their own genome outside the nucleus. And that genome, along with the structure of mitochondria, is eerily similar to that of ancient bacteria. So, you see, even within a single cell, the line between the body itself and an outside object being signaled is not so clear. So when you affect others around you, it's only an extension of your abilities, not something different altogether. Dr. Harrington saw that Joel was thinking, taking it all in. He went back to his desk and pulled out a couple of crystal glasses and a carafe of scotch. Care for a glass? He asked Joel. I'm good with my soda, Joel replied, holding up his glass. You don't care for anything stronger? Joel shrugged. I can give myself a buzz anytime I want. Ah, now I know the years and billions of dollars of research were all worth it, Dr. Harrington said with a smirk. Joel gave a non-committal smile, detecting sarcasm still not being a strong point for him. Come outside with me, Dr. Harrington said, confusing Joel for a moment. He followed Dr. Harrington and saw him stepping out on a 15-foot by 10-foot custom patio. Stepping out himself, he looked hundreds of feet down on the eclectic bustle on the city streets. Disheveled vagrants pushing past well-coiffed socialites, both passing by delis, then luxury boutiques. Then he looked around at the patio, a wrought iron beauty ringed with a collection of healthy hydrangeas, chrysanthemums and azaleas. My little oasis, Dr. Harrington said as he motioned around the patio, and my favorite perk. A bee flew from one of the flowers and onto the sugary edge of Joel's glass. So you got buzzed after all, Dr. Harrington said with a smile, but got no response. What is it, Joel? What are you thinking of? He asked. I was just thinking that this talk of different cells, or even parts of cells once having been separate organisms, it reminds me of bees, and how they will die for the hive if that is their role, just like white blood cells will die in droves to keep a person alive. Indeed, Dr. Harrington replied, and amoebas will sometimes combine with other amoebas to form a multicellular slug that moves as one. Some of the individual amoebas will circulate throughout the slug and absorb pathogens and toxins, sacrificing themselves for the whole. But even when we are talking about clearly separate organisms, the parallels with a single body are striking. And bees are a good example. We find that the bee which becomes queen does so because she is one of several fed a large amount of a compound called royal jelly. What's ironic about this royal jelly is that it doesn't directly induce the transformation. It actually blocks the action of an inhibitor that was keeping the transformation from taking place, to not only greater size and fertility, but also a lifespan 50 times longer. So, you see, all of the female bees are queens, being held back, in a sense. Just like we mortals, and even you, are still held back. In any case, the new queen kills the other newly emerged virgin queens if she can't get them while they're still in their cells, or is killed herself. Should she make it to the top of the mountain and become a mated queen, she will release a chemical called queen mandibular pheromone, which literally signals the worker bees not to produce any more queens. It even causes the other female bees not to produce ovaries. Kind of like the cells within a body are signaled to become one type and suppressed from becoming another? Joel replied. Dr. Harrington nodded. You can become like that queen bee, signaling those around you, Joel. But this time for their benefit. So, there really is a valid comparison between white blood cells attacking pathogens, like an independent organism, and the way animals similarly take on different roles and even die for the good of a group. But you need not look at an obvious example, like a white blood cell. Even muscle cells only differentiate as they age. They are independent parts that require communication to work. After all, why have a peripheral nervous system communicating instructions if the body is simply one big whole? And yet the body is an undivided whole, Joel argued. It begins with one cell that contains all of the genetic information, as do most cells of even an adult. Yes, and this is where the paradox becomes most interesting of all, Dr. Harrington replied. There is reason to believe that each cell contains not only the genetic code for how a person comes to be, but everything he could have been as well. For example, the human brain is about 3 times the size of a chimpanzee's. This is despite the oft-quoted statistic that chimps share 99% of our genetic code. What has been found is that many of the same genes that allow for a larger brain in humans are present in chimps. But many of these genes simply don't express themselves at all, or not to the same extent as in humans. Humans also have thousands of genes that scientists can see but are not active. These switched-off genes as well. In fact, less than 2% of our genes are actually transcribed into proteins and become active. Although it turns out that the other 98%, this non-coding or junk DNA, often affects the expression or non-expression of the other genes. Joel paused. I do see how all this information could end up being useful, but what's the next step? The next step, first and foremost, is to conquer the most stubborn of diseases, Dr. Harrington replied. Which diseases are those? Cancer, multiple sclerosis, AIDS. What do these diseases have in common, Joel? Joel pondered for a moment. They all turn the body against itself. They take advantage of the strange paradox of the body, that it is both one entity and a collection of disparate parts, engaged in internecine warfare. Exactly, Dr. Harrington replied excitedly. They co-opt the body's resources, becoming one with it in the worst sense. Multiple sclerosis causes the body to attack its own myelin. The AIDS virus uses white blood cells themselves, the body's natural defenders, to reproduce itself. Cancer uses the body's energy to create and enlarge its tumors, instead of attacking them. The body itself often counteracts the treatments of these diseases. So much so, these diseases integrate with their hosts. We must battle these diseases using the same holistic approach. And no one is better equipped to do that than you. No one can better tap into the subconscious knowledge our bodies have that can defeat these diseases. By seeing how the signals you send activate the patient's own healing system, we can try to replicate the results using drugs or other tools. That is the gift only you can give. One no computer or machine can give. The gift of insight, of knowing without always knowing how you know. And no tech's resources can help you in this mission. There was a silence for a moment. Joel realized now in his excitement he had erased all doubt it was him who had sent the prototype drugs. And it's okay that all I have is a GED? I'd be with a bunch of people with doctorates. Dr. Harrington sat and thought for a moment. He replied, then walked back inside as Joel followed, over to the panoply of degrees on his wall, earned and honorary. Grabbing one from the wall, he casually smashed the glass frame on the corner of his desk and withdrew an honorary degree. Pulling out a Sharpie, he unceremoniously crossed out his own name and scribbled in Joel's. There, Dr. Harrington said as he handed the paper to Joel. You now have a doctorate from Harvard. Joel stood, disbelieving for a moment. Okay, he said finally. I'm in.